Okay, I hope I'm audible to all students who are attending this lecture of Intermediate Microeconomics Part 1. We intend to start with the first topic within our lectures on Intermediate Microeconomics Part 1. This is called Budget Constraint. So all students who are attending this lecture, you can write the heading, Budget Constraint. The books I prefer to follow for my lectures on budget constraints. One is Intermediate Microeconomics by Hal R. Varian. And another is Microeconomic Theory by Snyder and Nicholson. So these are the books, standard books I prefer to follow for my lectures in Intermediate Microeconomics Part 1. Okay. As per the editions I have, the chapter number might be different, but if students are carrying the latest edition of this particular books, the chapter numbers might be different, but all the concepts covered within the chapter are all the same. Okay, so let's quickly now understand what does the budget constraint of a consumer capture. Okay, so in my introductory microeconomics course as well, we have done lectures on consumer theory where we looked at budget constraints in brief. But now in our intermediate microeconomics part 1 course, I will be looking at budget constraints in more depth. Okay, so let's first of all write what is meant by a budget constraint. So let's look at the definition. The budget constraint of a consumer gives us the combination of goods which the consumer can afford to consume given his income and the prices of the consumption basket. So we know this from the introductory microeconomics course. The budget constraint of a consumer is going to capture his or her affordability. How much he or she can afford to consume given his income, his or her income, and the price of the consumption basket. Now I'm going to limit it to two goods. We are going to call them as good X1, good X2. But we can extend it to multiple goods. We can extend it to more than two goods. Okay, so I can say that let X1 comma X2 denote the consumption vector. It's a consumption vector in the R2 space, basically. I'm adding a bit of mathematical economics also. So X1 comma X2 denotes the consumption vector in the R2 space, okay, where X1 denotes consumption of good 1 and X2 denotes the consumption of good 2. Okay, so X1, X2 is a consumption vector in the R2 space. This is not R square, guys. This is R2. We have done this in our mathematical methods for economics part 2 course. Okay, so when we did functions in several variables. So X1, X2 denotes the consumption vector in the R2 space. Let P1 comma P2 denote the price vector again in the R2 space. That means 2 dimensions, where P1 denotes the price of good 1 and P2 denotes the price of good 2. Okay, so x1, x2 is the consumption vector, P1, P2 is the price vector. I'm erasing the initial portion. We are all aware about the topic we are doing. On the top, I can write, let M denote the income of the consumer. This income is earned by the consumer in a particular period. Think of it as monthly income. So let M denote the income of the consumer. Then what is the equation of the budget constraint? So I can erase this particular part now. And we can write, so I'm defining the equation of the budget constraint now. So erasing this part off, I can write, define the budget constraint of the consumer as total expenditure. So total expenditure on good 1, which is P1 into X1, plus total expenditure on good 2, which is P2 into X2. So P1 X1 is your total expenditure on good 1. How much the consumer is spending on good 1. P2 X2 is the total expenditure on good 2. Whenever you multiply price by quantity, you get total expenditure. This should be less than or equal to the income of the consumer. This is the equation of the budget constraint. That means your total expenditure on both the goods cannot exceed your income. Remember, we are not allowing for possibility of borrowing here. The consumer cannot borrow. That means whatever he or she is spending should either be equal to his or her income or should be less than his or her income. This is the equation of the budget constraint. This is the equation of the budget constraint. And now we can also interpret it. So if I erase this part off, so mathematically, you can see, guys, this is the dot product of 2 vectors. Students who have taken my lectures on mathematical methods for economics, where we had done vector theory, this is the dot product of 2 vectors. Basically, this expression, I can say this is the dot product of the price vector with the quantity vector. I can write it's the dot product of the price vector and the consumption vector. In my intermediate microeconomics course, students should be able to explain and understand and get convinced mathematically also. My objective in this course is to make things sound mathematically and logically correct and convincing. So I'm going to use some of the mathematical methods for economics prerequisite topics which we have done before. So a suggestion would be that students who are taking up my intermediate microeconomics courses should be first comfortable with mathematical methods for economics course. So the dot product of 2 vectors, P1, P2, dot product X1, X2 is given by P1, X1 plus P2, X2. Okay, so now let's look at the interpretation of the budget constraint. The students can write that the budget constraint, of the consumer requires the amount of money spent on tow goods to be no more than the total income. No more than the total income of the consumer. That means the budget constraint captures the affordability. The consumer cannot spend more than his or her income. Okay, so now let's generalize it. So if I now generalize it, I can write the generalization. So let x1, x2, xn be the consumption vector in the Rn space, and let P1, P2, Pn. So now we have n goods. So let P1, P2, Pn be the price vector in the Rn space. And let M denote the income of the consumer. So I can write, therefore, define the budget constraint of the consumer as the dot product of the price vector with the dot product of the price vector with the consumption vector has to be less than or equal to the income, which implies we know how to find the dot product P1x1 plus P2x2 plus dot 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 Pnxn less than equal to income. This is in general the budget constraint of the consumer when we have n goods along with n prices. Okay, so now erasing all this, let's quickly move to the next concept, which is budget line. Now there's a difference between budget constraint and budget line. So now, so guys, again, I'm going to restrict my analysis only to two goods and two prices. The generalization was just to help the students understand how we can extend it to n dimensions. But obviously, in my lectures, I'm only going to focus on two-dimension space. Okay, so budget lines. Let's quickly understand what is a budget line. So budget line is the set of all bundles. It is the set of all bundles x1, x2 that cost the consumer exactly his or her income. So define the equation of the budget line as again I can say P1x1 plus P2x2 now exactly equal to the income of the consumer. When we were talking about budget constraints, the total expenditure of the consumer was either less than or equal to income. But in case of budget lines, the consumer is spending exactly equal to his income. That means this is the total expenditure on good 1 and 2. total expenditure on good 1 and 2. This is your total income. Your total expenditure has to be exactly equal to your total income. Okay, so this was for 2 goods. I can write the generalization. Okay, so I can say that if again x1, x2 to xn belonging to the Rn space is the consumption vector, and P1, P2, Pn belonging to the Rn space is the price vector, and M denotes the income of the consumer, then define the budget line as, define the equation of the budget line as P1x1 plus P2x2 plus dot 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 Pnxn exactly equal to the income. This is the equation of the budget line in the nth dimension. This is the equation of the budget line in the 2-dimension space. Equation of the budget line in 2-dimension space. There you only have 2 goods with 2 prices. Now, obviously, we can't visualize the nth dimension, but let's look at how you can plot the budget line and the budget set in the 2D space. So, if I erase all this off, let's look at the diagram which depicts the budget set and the budget line. So, since we are having only 2 goods, we have 2 axes. On the horizontal axis, we have good x1. On the vertical axis, we have good x2. Okay, recall what was the equation of the budget line. It's P1x1 plus P2x2 equal to M. Now, how do I find the intercepts? So, let's look at how do we find the horizontal intercept. So, I can say horizontal intercept. To find the horizontal intercept, okay, put x2 equal to 0. If I have to find out the horizontal intercept, that means the intercept on the x1 axis, you put x2 as 0. Put x2 equal to 0 in the equation. So what do we get? We get x1 as m by p. That means this particular, the coordinates of this point are m by p1 comma 0. This is the horizontal intercept. Interpretation of the horizontal intercept, let's quickly write that. The horizontal intercept captures the maximum amount of x1 the consumer can afford to consume. The consumer can afford to consume given his income and prices. The horizontal intercept, which students can see in the diagram, HI. The short form I use for horizontal intercept is HI. It is going to capture the maximum amount of good one the consumer can afford to consume given his or her income and prices of both the goods. Now, how do we find the vertical intercept? Let me erase this part off. So to find the vertical intercept, what do? We put x1 as 0 in the above equation. So if I have to find the vertical intercept, on the vertical intercept, x1 is 0. So if I put x1 as 0, I get x2 as m by p2. So the coordinates of this point are 0, m by p2. And interpretation, I can write the vertical intercept captures the maximum amount of x2 the consumer can afford to consume given his or her income and prices. So this is vertical intercept VI, short form VI. So I'm revising again. The horizontal intercept of the budget constraint gives us the maximum amount of good 1 the consumer can afford to consume given his or her income and prices. The vertical intercept gives us the maximum amount of good 2 the consumer can afford to consume given his or her income and prices. Now, guys, let's talk about the slope. Now, how do we find the slope? In my lectures on mathematical methods for economics, remember, slope is nothing but, in very simple terms, it's dy by dx. This is the y-axis. This is the x-axis. On the x-axis, we are measuring good x1. On the y-axis, we are measuring good x2. The slope of the budget line is nothing but the slope of the budget line is the derivative of x2 with respect to x1. Remember, it's dy by dx. On the y-axis, what am I measuring? X2. On the x-axis, what am I measuring? X1. The slope is nothing but dx2 by dx1. Now, from the budget line equation, can I find dx2 by dx1? So, if I write it here, if I rearrange the budget line, rearranging the budget line, I can write P2x2 as m minus P1x1. So my x2 is m by P2 minus P1 by P2x1. Therefore, all of us know very basic differentiation. If I have to take the derivative of x2 with respect to x1, differentiate x2 with respect to x1, you get minus P1 by P2. Again, I'm repeating, students who have taken up my intermediate microeconomics course, you should be first comfortable with mathematical methods for economics as a prerequisite for my intermediate microeconomics part 1 course. Okay, so the slope of the budget line is therefore minus P1 by P2, which is the ratio of the prices. And since it has a negative sign, the budget line is downward sloping. So I can say that since the slope is negative, budget line is downward sloping. And since P1 and P2 are constant, budget line is linear. Remember, whenever the slope is constant, it's a linear line. So that means when I join these 2 points, I get the budget line. So the red line is my budget line. Why is it downward sloping? Because all of us know that given our limited income, if we plan to buy more of good X1, we have to give up some amount of X2 because we have limited income. If our income was unlimited, the budget line would not be downward sloping. Or if the goods were available to us for free, the budget line would not be downward sloping. Why is it downward sloping? Because if you want to buy more of X1, you have to give up some amount of X2 every time given your limited income. And why is it linear? Because we assume perfect competition, prices are constant. Prices of good 1 and good 2 are all set by the industry. The firms take these prices as given. So since prices are constant at a given point of time, I'm saying, not over a period of time. At one particular point of time, P1 and P2 are constants. So slope, which is minus P1 by P2, is also a constant. And remember from my lectures on mathematical methods for economics, whenever the slope is constant, the function is a linear function. So it's downward sloping linear line. So the equation of this is nothing but P1x1 plus P2x2 exactly equal to x. This is the equation of the budget line. Now let's interpret the slope. So let's write what does the slope measure. So I can erase all this off now. And let us write the interpretation of the slope. Interpretation of the slope. So I can write the slope of the budget line, which is minus P1 by P2, measures the rate at which the market is willing to substitute one good for another. The slope of the budget line measures the rate at which the market is willing to substitute one good for another. It also measures the opportunity cost of good of X1. It also measures the opportunity cost of X1. That is how much X2 the consumer has to give up to buy, or I can say to buy one additional unit of X1. So we can say that the slope of the budget line also measures the opportunity cost of X1. In very simple terms, the slope captures that what is the rate at which the market is willing to substitute good 2 for good 1. That means if the consumer has to buy one more unit of X1, then given the market, how much X2 the consumer has to give up. Remember, there's a difference between how much the consumer is willing to give up and has to give up. How much the consumer is actually willing to give up is captured by the slope of the indifference curve, which is going to come in the coming lectures. But when we talk about budget lines, we don't talk about consumers' willingness. We talk about market's willingness. Budget line has nothing to do with consumers' willingness. Indifference curves are all to do with consumers' willingness. We do not talk about consumers' willingness in budget line. All we talk about is consumers' affordability. So when we talk about slope of the budget line, it is measuring the rate at which the market is willing to. The market, not the consumer. The market is willing to substitute one good for another. It also measures the opportunity cost, that if the consumer buys an additional unit of X1, how much X2 the consumer has to give up. Not willing to give up, has to give up. Given the market, how much X2 the consumer has to give up to buy one more unit of X1. So the slope of the budget line measures the market's willingness, not the consumer's willingness. So I can write it here as a note, because in my lecture, students should be crystal clear with each and every concept. So I can write the slope of the budget line. BL denotes budget line. The slope of the budget line measures the market's willingness. In the bracket, I can write not the consumer's willingness. To substitute one good for another. This is an important note for perfect clarity. It is going to measure the rate at which the market is willing to substitute one good for another, not consumer's willingness. The consumer's willingness is captured by indifference curves, which are going to come in the coming lectures. Okay, now when we talk about budget set, what was budget set? Budget set comprises of all the bundles which cost the consumer either equal to his or her income or even less than his or her income. So what was the equation of the budget set? Budget set or budget constraint equation was P1x1 plus P2x2 either less than or equal to income. Whereas what was the equation of the budget line? Budget line equation was P1x1 plus P2x2 exactly equal to income. So guys, how will I show the budget set in pictures? All the blue portion, including the budget line. Suppose I call this as A. Suppose the vertical intercept is A, the horizontal intercept is, let's say, B. So the budget set is from the above diagram. To make it more clear, from the above diagram, budget line is AB, whereas the budget set or the budget constraint, whatever you want to say, is OA. That means this whole triangle OAB is your budget set. So in fact, I can say it's triangle OA. Triangle OAB is your budget set. AB is your budget line because AB is going to include only those combinations of X1 and X2 which are costing you exactly equal to your income. Whereas all the area below the budget line, the blue area, all this area is going to include X1 and X2 which is costing you less than your income. So this is your budget set. This is your budget set because it includes all those bundles which either cost you equal to your income or cost you less than your income. So I can also write that the budget set includes the budget line also. I can write this point here as a note. Budget set includes the budget line. Okay, so students, this is where I intend to stop in this particular lecture. The objective of this lecture was to introduce the concept of budget constraints to all students. Although this is the topic which I have covered in very brief in my introductory microeconomics course. But like I said in the beginning, in intermediate microeconomics course, we are going to do it in more depth. Okay, so I stop in this particular lecture. In the next lecture of budget constraints, we are going to talk about shifts in the budget line. Today, we have derived the budget line, we have derived the horizontal, vertical intercept, the slopes, we have done the interpretations. In the next lecture, we are going to see what are the factors which cause shifts in the budget line. So I stop in this particular lecture. I hope all students have enjoyed this lecture. Any doubt, you can either unmute your mics and ask, or you can call up, or you can mail me your doubts at divineschoolofeconomics@gmail.com. This is where I stop in this lecture.